A few months ago, I was inspired to make this Jacob's Ladder. As you can see on the one side, there's a bunch of guys. You know, these are pictures from the 1980s with their Hollywood headshots, you know, kind of presenting their best selves. When you go to flip it over, however, what it reveals is their other persona, their Ronald McDonald character persona. I'll show you a little bit more in a second, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I made it, some of the ideas I had around it, a little bit about how I made it, and some of the ways that as a toy, as an object, I think it has some really interesting ideas about who we are, how we present ourselves to the world, and the ways that we can change. So what is the Jacob's Ladder? A Jacob's Ladder is a toy. This is one that I got in, I think it was in Mexico many, many years ago. Very simple, very colorful. As you can see, it has 6 blocks. I'm not sure if you can make it with more or less, probably more or less. It has 6 blocks and then some ribbon tying it all together, and then you flip it. And it's a toy. And it's very satisfying. Makes a great sound. Transforms. So this is a pretty simple example, which I'm slowly destroying as I'm messing with it here on camera. Over the last year or so, I got really interested in bookbinding, actually. I watched a lot of YouTube videos about bookbinding. I found it very soothing, very satisfying in a chaotic world. So after watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos about bookbinding, I actually went to a local nonprofit here in Chicago called Spudnik Press and took a one-day bookbinding class. It was really fun. I met some interesting folks, got my hands on into the process of bookbinding, and it really kept my interest. I thought it was really interesting, not only from kind of a form and structure standpoint of how do you make a book, what is a book, but also obviously the content in a book. So I ended up going down a bit of a rabbit hole and getting another a resource. This is a really great book called Making Handmade Books by Elisa Golden. It has tons of different book structures and forms in it, really detailed instructions on a lot of different ways to make a book and to present information, from simple folds to sewn structures to different gluing techniques. But one thing that really intrigued me was that she had a section on how to make a Jacob's Ladder. So I was really fascinated by this. I hadn't even thought of Jacob's Ladder as a book form or even as a narrative form, but the more I thought about it, it makes a lot of sense. It's got multiple pages. When you use the toy and you flip it, it flips the pages of the book. And I think in a way it is a really unique telling of a story because you cannot see both sides of the Jacob Ladder at the same time. It's also sort of a complicated structure. There's kind of 2 pages of detailed instructions about how to fold over the various pieces of paper and how to get the ribbons just right so that it will actually work as a Jacob's Ladder structure. So it's a little bit complicated, and I thought, oh, that's a really interesting project I want to make. Taking a step back, a couple of years ago, actually, I was at a garage sale in rural Wisconsin somewhere and found a box full of old McDonald's junk. I think it was somebody who had previously worked for McDonald's corporate headquarters, which is here in Chicago. And as I was rifling through it, it was a lot of garbage, a lot of old memos. This is some stuff from the 80s. But the thing that really grabbed my attention and the reason I grabbed the box was this, which was their field directory. And I was like, what is the field directory? And what it is page after page of men, all men, mostly white men from the early 80s, and their headshots. And most of them have their Ronald McDonald alter ego attached to them. And I just thought it was a really funny document of a particular time. You know, these are men from all over the US. Oh, okay, Steve, you're from Arlington, Texas, and your expertise is in ventriloquism and singing. Some of the other folks are, sign language interpreters. Some of the other folks have, balloon animals and things like that. So I just thought this was a really interesting and funny document. So grabbed that for a couple of bucks and have held on to it for a couple of years, not really knowing if I was going to do anything with it, if I was just going to bring it out at parties to show people, oh, look at this, isn't this funny? These, funny pictures, these guys from the 80s, and they're Ronald McDonald's persona. It has their full addresses and names and things like that and phone numbers, which I'm sure are long since out of date. I did actually look up a bunch of these folks, and many of them, this is from 1984, have since passed away, although many of them have had really interesting long-term careers. They've been, clowns or jugglers or magicians, like in and out of the Ronald McDonald persona. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So basically what it is made with 3 strips of ribbon. On this side, you can see here there's kind of a red one and an orange one, and then there's a yellow one going up the middle. So here, I'll flip it so that you can actually see these fine gentlemen. So basically there's 2 pieces of board that are sandwiched between these ribbons. So what that does is it makes it so that it's able to move freely. You can kind of see there's a little space in between them. And that's what makes the Jacob's ladder, right? So I love the sound of it. I think there's a total ASMR component to it, which is really great. But I also love the visual of it. I love the transformation of it, And I did this real quick and dirty. These were just white sheets of paper that I printed and then affixed to the book board. And then I thought this needs a little bit of color, so red and yellow. I hand painted these and then put some Mod Podge or some other sort of adhesive sort of covering on it for a little bit of protection. Although, the other thing that intrigues me about it is the fact that it is a toy, and toys get used and toys age, and just like this toy ages, it's sort of an interesting metaphor for, the folks in this Jacob's ladder. They're aging. They have aged. Many of them have passed away, in fact. I looked up a few of them online. So I really like the idea of this as a toy that gets used. It's kind of in a child's hands. There's this sort of clown, Ronald McDonald element. I think there's some really interesting ideas around that. But speaking of the ideas around it, I want to talk about, the idea of transformation a little bit. I got to thinking, like, these folks are middle-aged men who decided, I have a passion for entertaining. I have a passion to share some of my gifts. Maybe I'm a ventriloquist, maybe I'm a juggler. And they found this vehicle of, transforming themselves, putting them into makeup in order to do something different, to become something different, And the funny thing is about this directory is, in the directory, you can kind of like see the person, and you can say, oh, haha, look at that. That's him as Ronald McDonald, etc. You can kind of do this compare and contrast. But in real life, there was the guy doing his day-to-day life. I'm sure these were not full-time Ronald McDonalds. They had other jobs. But then they also, took this moment to transform into this character, this beloved character. And at that time, they would presumably come out, entertain the kids. So there was never the man and the Ronald McDonald in the same spot, like in these pictures. It was always a moment of transformation. There was always a person, and then a putting on of this identity, and then the transformation into Ronald McDonald, and then presumably afterwards, the same sort of reverse transformation. And that's sort of what I like about the Jacob's ladder as well. It doesn't give you the opportunity to compare these people right next to each other. There's always this moment where it flips, and you kind of can't say like, oh, well, that's the guy, and then that's the Ronald McDonald. There's this kind of audio and visual interruption of the process that doesn't allow you to like have them next to each other. In the same way, you never saw Superman and Clark Kent right next to each other. They were two independent beings in time and space in some way. They were never there at the same time. For a more contemporary example of this, all you have to do is look to RuPaul's Drag Race and the whole drag culture. Drag queens are superheroes in some way. They have, or they're clowns in some ways, which is something RuPaul often says. You know, there's the moment before they transform, and then there's the moment of transformation. And if you know drag queens, or if you watch RuPaul's Drag Race, you know that there's a really concrete transformation, not only of the physical, but also of the persona, of the way they present themselves to the world. It's a superpower. I think the other way to think about it is that we all make these transformations every day in our daily lives. We put on our work drag and go into the office and put on that face and, oh, hello, Karen, hello, Bob, all that, you know. Some level, not that it's inauthentic, but there's a certain performance or presentation of how we are in those environments. There's also, you know, a lot of other examples of that. We go out with our friends, so we have our, you know, our personalities. I think we're all at our core ourselves, but there are these moments where we either by external forces, thinking of like code switching, or internal forces, wanting to be a different version of ourselves, that we try on for longer or shorter periods of time, different personas, different ways of existing in the world, and different ways of presenting ourselves. So I think in some ways, you know, we're not really all that different from these folks, or, you know, in some ways, from these clowns. I mean, maybe I'm saying we're all clowns in some way, and maybe we are clowns, you know, putting on shows, putting on our performance of who we are to the people that we want to. And there's something, I don't think, inauthentic about that. I think that there is an aspirational element to it, like, oh, this is the person that I could be. And actually, that reminds me of a book that I just happened to read this past summer that sort of ties into all this. The book is called The Alter Ego Effect: The Power of Secret Identities to Transform Your Life. It's by a guy named Todd Herman. I thought, oh, this is kind of a self-help book. It's about kind of unlocking your superpowers. He brought up some really interesting examples, you know, thinking about David Bowie creating this persona of Ziggy Stardust to have a different way of exploring creativity. Or similarly, Beyonce developing this persona, Sasha Fierce, who allowed her to explore a different range of music, a different style, sort of become more of who she already was. So this book, The Alter Ego Effect, had some really interesting ideas. It talked about these celebrity examples, but it also had a lot of thoughtful conversation about how you can bring this idea into your daily life, where you can leverage the idea of a superpower or a super alter ego to, you know, overcome limitations that you might have, to see yourself differently, to express yourself differently to others. And I think, as I was saying before, that's something we all do, whether we think about it or not. So there's a power in being conscious about that. I think there's something also about the idea of putting on masks and putting on a show for others, in that we all do it for, you know, we do it for a lot of reasons. We do it for the Instagram. We do it for social media. We put on, you know, certain looks or ideas to explore for others, to consume, you know, and that is really a lot about what this consumer culture is. I think there's ideas around nostalgia, you know, toys obviously being a nostalgic thing, the sort of handmade nature of this as an object, with the sort of nostalgia of childhood, the nostalgia of the Happy Meal, with the nostalgia of clowns. I mean, obviously there's a whole culture of clowns being seen as this sort of scary or evil. There's this idea of the clown as sort of menacing, you know, as exampled by this guy over my shoulder that I got at a garage sale years and years ago. So there's a lot of really interesting idea, like the menacing, you know, sort of a middle-aged man dressing up, you know, but it's, you know, in this context, it's not predatory. It's about entertainment. It's about bringing joy. And, you know, I think that's something that can be celebrated, you know, bringing joy to people, you know, even if it is a little weird, especially if it's a little weird, I think is a really powerful and interesting way to approach the world these days. So yeah, I don't know. I made this thing. It's sort of an art object. It's sort of a toy. It's sort of just like a weirdo kind of funny, interesting thing that I thought would be great to make. Um, but I think it does have a lot of interesting ideas about transformation, about us as we present ourselves to the world, as, you know, kind of a bit of corporate nostalgia in some ways. You know, it also, on a bigger picture, makes me think about the individual agency that we all have to transform ourselves, to transform our looks, to transform our identity, to transform our gender, to transform our expression in the world, and how that's really a beautiful thing. And we can only hope for more of that in the world. So what's next for this project? I think I'm a really big fan of this one, but I want to make another version of it, perhaps print it and construct it a little bit differently, tighten up some of the builds so that it actually flips more consistently. I do love that sound though. Something very, very, very satisfying about it. But there's also a whole lot of other men in this book that I can draw from for inspiration. So I'm sure there will be other Jacob's Ladders in my future to work on that, and probably some other project as well. I had looked up a few of these folks, and some of them are still doing their entertaining thing, not as Ronald McDonald, but as magicians, as speakers, as presenters. So there's some really interesting information online about a lot of these folks. And then a lot of these folks have passed away, which has been really interesting. I looked through some of their obituaries, which are online, and you know, these are a lot of times people who had very conventional lives, aside from their occasional dalliances in Ronald McDonald hood. But then there are some people who dedicated their lives to being entertainers and magicians and, you know, educators and speakers and things like that. So there's a lot of material in here, and I am excited to share that with you as I start creating more. But I want to thank you for watching and letting me talk a little bit about this object, about this Jacob's Ladder project, and some of the ideas that I had while I was making it. Have a great day.